Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Good morning, I'm Karl Fitzpatrick and welcome to Business Matters. Well, Barney Callaghan has over 30 years' experience in leadership, coaching and management, enabling people to harness their unique strengths to improve their performance and impact. Barney joins us now to share his unique experience with us. So Barney, you describe yourself as an enabler of people, but what exactly do you mean by that?
I suppose a lot of my work is actually spent trying to help people discover all the good that's in them already. Many people who have crossed my path professionally at an individual level and professionally at a corporate level are usually under the impression that they have an awful lot less going for them than they actually have. And one of the jobs and one of the challenges in my business, particularly the coaching end of my business, is to actually enable people to discover stuff for themselves as opposed to teach them anything. So that's really where that comes from, the notion of actually helping people develop their own capacity and indeed discover the capacity they have in themselves already. Dan Goleman, the great emotional intelligence writer, wrote in one of his more obscure books, "What can't be seen is hard to change." So that's really what I spend some of my working life at.
Now, you've enjoyed an illustrious career with the Defence Forces, the NHS and, of course, GASHGA. What stands out from that period of your career, Barney?
I suppose what stands out, as you said, I've had a number of careers. My sons used to say to me that I'm not able to hold down a job, you know. I suppose it was really coming to terms with the human condition. Organisations have their strategies, they have their structures, they have their processes, and the good ones tend to focus on their outcomes, you know. But I think it was coming to terms with the human condition, and that stands out for me particularly well. And probably more important is coming to terms with my own condition as a human being. I mean, I would be an individual who has has had the benefit of very, very good training and development throughout my working life and very, very good education and experience throughout my working life. And I suppose one of the major things for me and one of the major discoveries as I became more aware, let's say having hit about 30 or 35, was actually being more conscious of the impact I would have on other people and the consequence of us entering a room or working with a group of people. So there are things that stand out.
And Barney, typically, what type of problems are your clients presenting to you?
Sometimes people come thinking that they have a problem with one thing, but by the end of a 60 or a 90-minute coaching session, sometimes they're actually looking and saying, no, the problem I thought I had is not the problem I have. So just to give you an example, many people at varying positions in organizations come to talk about time management and getting better use of their 168, the 168 hours that we all have in a week. And they think that that's the problem. But frequently, that's the symptom of a different problem, you know, maybe even a greater problem. And the greater problem possibly being issues around not having a sufficiency of goals established, not having clarity about their goals, and even if they have goals, the fact that they might not be written down. And the literature supports this thing about the difference between people with written goals and goals in their head, and of course people who don't have goals at all. So sometimes it's like that. People coming thinking they have a problem with managing time, they think they have a problem with work colleague or work colleagues, when frequently it turns out to be something else.
And quite often, Barney, people feel that if they have a to-do list, then they're a well-organised person with good time management skills.
Never a truer word was spoken, Karl. Yeah, people sometimes think having the list is the solution to your problem. Of course, there's a number of things about the list. When you have a list, you have to get off your bottom and start doing something with it. But within that, then, there's the issue, of course, and this might sound like an oversimplification, but frequently people come with this, not fully realising it. Which do you tackle first? And, you know, this notion of kind of the 20-80 rule, the Pareto principle, that you need to actually tackle the things that are going to give you biggest return for your efforts later on, or to tackle the things that, say, for example, if an endeavour you're engaged in has a critical path associated with it, that there's a necessary sequence to go through. well, then you need to make sure that you get the sequence right. So that falls into the 20% of things that you might be doing on your list that will give you 80% bang for your buck, you know.
And that leads me then nicely into delegation, because many leaders find it very difficult to delegate effectively, maybe because they feel they need to be in control or nobody can do the job as well as them. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the two things you described there are kind of, they're classic of people who are not able to delegate. But to go back to what we said at the beginning of this conversation, the notion of enabling people, a person in a senior management or an executive management position who wishes to delegate to people around them, the first thing they have to do is to empower and enable the person to whom the work is going to be delegated. I mean, delegation, and I know I'm preaching to the converted here, and indeed a lot of your listeners will be well aware of this as well. Delegation is not a book-passing exercise. It's not moving the monkey onto the shoulder of the other person exercise. Delegation is quite a deep and meaningful piece of work and process work, where both the person doing the delegation and the person to whom the work is being delegated should be operating in partnership with high levels of trust and high levels of mutual respect. And also, the delegation process should be considerate of the personal development of both individuals, but primarily the person to whom the delegation is done. So when a person in a senior position in an organisation delegates to somebody else, part of the marketing and the selling of that delegation is that here's a personal development opportunity for you. But they must, of course, equip them with the authority then to exercise the work that needs to be done. So they're delegating authority to act, but they're not delegating ultimate responsibility. And it's a delicate process, Karl, you know, and it requires thought, awareness, consideration, and usually some training, possibly for both parties.
And of course, problem solving is an everyday exercise to every manager. How do you go about solving a problem, Barney?
I suppose the key thing is actually trying to name things. Trying to name what it is that I'm dealing with and trying to be responsible to want to identify the problem to solve it. And inherent in all of this is attitude. People who have a positive attitude, or as the American academic Carl Dweck describes it, as a growth mindset. And people who have that growth mindset are people who will name what the problem is much quicker than those who are pessimistic and arguably get to the solution or solutions to the problem. You know, I'm thinking in answering that of the late Viktor Frankl. I think he died around 2011. He was a man who survived a concentration camp during the Second World War. And he said everything can be taken from a man of one thing, the freedom to choose one's own way. And I think frequently in trying to answer that about getting to the root of a problem, there's the issue about awareness and the issue about choosing the attitude you're going to have. And if you have a positive and a growth mindset attitude, and again, the literature does support this. I mean, this isn't just my opinion. The literature does support this. If you have that perspective and you choose a positive attitude, you choose to be positive, the probability of a successful outcome is considerably increased.
Let's lead on now to resilience. How much of an issue is resilience in people today?
I think it's a huge issue. For the children of the baby boomers, there is a school of thought that says the generation that's currently now in their kind of 30s or thereabouts have lost a lot of their resilience because in their growing up they frequently didn't learn to face the hard realities, the little knocks that take place, you know. So what I'm finding myself is that resilience actually, it is an issue that needs to be addressed. Some of my work, in fact, someone came into my life in the last 48 hours to do some resilience work for them with a group of people that they have working for them. It actually is a big problem because we live in a much faster world, a much more cynical world, and we live in a world where it's a lot less assured than it would have been when I came out of university in the very late 1970s.
And how can people go about building their resilience, Barney?
I think a word I used in the early part of this conversation, Carl, the whole thing about awareness, being aware of where they are at any particular time. And I'm not specifically talking about mindfulness particularly, although that is a useful way of being aware, but being conscious that there's a whole range of draws on every one of us, whether they're social media draws or Twitter draws or television draws or just noise generally. And I think an awareness of how distracted we as individuals actually are is a first step into actually developing resilience. But frequently, And I think it is the case that people who are not resilient don't know that they are. They're just suffering, and they're dealing with a low grade of continuous pain throughout their lives. And at some stage, either because of an illness of one kind or another, or an incident that happens to them, or an accident that occurs due to being stressed or inattentive or whatever, the penny eventually drops. I actually need to do something to fix this. And a lot of it has to do with self-management, and a lot of it has to do with having a cohort of supportive people around you. I remember doing catechism as a child in school, and we were told that we had to love each other, you know. But in actual fact, it's a word that's creeping back into management practice and management education practice in recent years, the need for people to actually love each other in order to get on with the act of living life, which has become much more complex in the last 30 or 40 years.
And of course, managers and leaders sometimes have to say no in their businesses to staff or to suppliers or to clients. How do they go about doing that without damaging the relationship, Barney?
Well, I suppose the key thing, is, Carl, in the first instance, is actually having a relationship, you know, and implicit in the notion of relationship is the idea of mutual respect. But when it comes to kind of doing the dirty deed, having to say no, and whether that's a time management issue in a business of having your door closed, so you're not constantly interrupted by busyness and you have time to think and reflect and maybe be resilient for the future. But I think having some kind of, having some thought given to what am I going to say to this person, you know? So instead of saying no, we can be saying not now. Someone's coming to you trying to get access to your calendar. Could we talk about this tomorrow? Or maybe could we talk about this Wednesday lunchtime or whatever? So there are ways of actually saying no to people without actually causing offence.
Now, finally, before we finish this morning's interview, I do want to have a chat to you about the voluntary work that you do, because you've given a lot of time over the years to Rotary. You were the district governor for Rotary Ireland. Yes. How important is voluntary work to you?
Listen, I'm really glad you mentioned this, and I'm glad you mentioned Rotary. There's about 1.2 million of us across the world, Carl. One of the biggest endeavours we're actually engaged in, and we have been for 3 decades, and that's our effort to eradicate, in conjunction with the World Health Organization and the US Centre for Disease Control and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is to eradicate polio from the face of the earth. I'd like, and all of the people I'm involved with, yourself included, are part of potential that legacy to be part of an organisation that said we took a spearhead role, a lead role in eradicating polio from the face of the earth. That's one reason why it's important to me. Rotary is important from another perspective as well. We have 5 different avenues of service in Rotary, and one of them is vocational service. Among my backgrounds, I come from a learning and development background, a training and development and coaching background. And I am facilitated within the organisation internationally to use my skill set, my education, my schooling and my experience to help and enable others. And it's a great joy. And I suppose the final thing I'd say about this idea of volunteering or giving of your time, what you give is nothing compared to what comes back.
What you give is nothing compared to what comes back. That is so very true. Well, if you've just tuned in, that was business coach Barney Callaghan, and I would like to thank Barney for sharing his insightful tips with us this morning.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
South